Still no updates for Illinois' gun and magazine ban lawsuits in the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, awaiting some kind of ruling so that either the plaintiffs challenging the law on Second Amendment grounds or the defendants, being the state, trying to work to uphold their law, advancing to the U.S. Supreme Court. That's the next step, at least in that case. We're still waiting on that. We're also anxiously anticipating the October 11th hearing in the Southern District, challenging the vagueness issues of Illinois' gun and magazine ban. And coming up, we'll flash back to December of last year, where Illinois State Police Director Brendan Kelly was asked about how he's going to enforce and set up the gun registry as part of the law that ultimately did pass. So a little bit of a flashback coming up, but we wanted to also get you updated on the latest out of New Mexico, where the lawsuits are stacking up against their governor's effort to curb the Second Amendment using executive orders. Welcome back. Springfield's Morning News. I'm Greg Bishop on 92.7 WMAY, Springfield's News and Talk. So, of course, you've got this ongoing issue in New Mexico where the governor there decided to ultimately prohibit the carrying of firearms, either concealed or with permit. And the lawsuits are starting to stack up there with Michelle Grisham's order to suspend formal carrying. And people have shown up to essentially say they're not going to comply. And people are carrying their firearms, open carry and concealed carry in various places. Not everybody, but those are doing that, are doing it in protest, especially because Democrats, local law enforcement, the sheriff and a mayor and a state's attorney, they all say that this is just unenforceable, and a variety of other high-profile Democrats saying that this is unconstitutional. So you've got the mix there of priorities as to how we curb gun violence, as they say it, or how we go about enforcing violent crime laws, which obviously is something already on the books, but is it being done enough? Or are we looking at things more through a social justice lens to try to bring about different outcomes without holding people accountable? That's more of the really truly substantive debate that needs to happen when it comes to curbing violent crime. But too often you've got certain influences saying, oh, it's gun crime, and then they want to focus on the firearm or the tool rather than on whether or not there's been substantive enforcement of violent crime laws already on the books. But anyways, you've got the constitutional question being filed by a whole host of different groups, including the Second Amendment Foundation. You've got National Gun Rights Association, Gun Owners of America, and even the Firearms Policy Council, which announced yesterday on Twitter that they've actually got a hearing set for today in their case. So they say on Twitter, legal update, a hearing on our motion for a temporary restraining order has been scheduled for tomorrow, and this was yesterday, at 1 p.m. So 1 p.m. New Mexico time, FPC is going to have their temporary restraining order question brought up in a court. So we'll see what happens with that case. But obviously, things are ongoing with New Mexico while we sit here and wait for any kind of outcome from the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals on the challenge to Illinois' gun and magazine ban. So flashing back now to December of 2022, it was the last of several hearings that the Illinois House held about a proposed ban on certain semi-automatic firearms and magazines and creating a registry. This was about 2 weeks or so before they ultimately did pass it, and the governor enacted it on January 10th. But it was a hearing featuring a variety of different voices. You had gun rights activists saying that you can't ban these firearms. It would violate the Constitution. It would violate Supreme Court precedent. You also had gun control advocates talking about the victims and how they need to be thought about in this entire conversation. But you also had questions at this hearing back on December 20th with Brendan Kelly, the Illinois State Police Director, and he was asked about enforcement of this. He was asked about setting up that gun registry that actually opens in about 2 weeks here in Illinois, where October 1st is the date they're going to open the registry. And then by January 1st, if there is ultimately no registration from a firearms owner, then they could possibly face criminal penalties. Well, how is all this going to be enforced? And that was ultimately the question posed to Brendan Kelly back on that hearing date of December 20th of 2022. And here's how he responded to those questions.
Anytime the Illinois State Police have had any issues complying with statutory things, it's because we've had instability. You can look at the funds that were swept in 15 and 17 that created some instability within the Firearms Safety Bureau, and that led to, in part, some of the backlogs we had with avoid and concealed carry. We are well within the statutory timeframes now because we've had stability in that funding, the ability to plan for hiring, the ability to plan for new technology to be implemented, and that has allowed us to bring those numbers down. My feeling is the Illinois State Police, you give us enough resources, we can put a man on the moon, if that's what the General Assembly wants us to do. Looking at the mission that is outlined here within this bill, we believe we can accomplish that, and we'll be able to answer ready so long as we have that support and those resources.
I presume there's hundreds of thousands of these listed firearms legally owned today, and if this passes, they won't be. How are you going to enforce compliance?
It's Republican leader McCombie.
And that will be part of our normal enforcement efforts. When we find something that is not in compliance with the law, either because it's a prohibitor or it's a ghost gun or it's a switch or whatever the case may be that makes it unlawful, that will just be one of the categories that our folks will be enforcing as they come across these firearms. But in terms of the individuals who that will be allowed to retain them and they'll be allowed to keep them, that's what some of those additional resources will need for the unsworn personnel to set up essentially kiosks to make it convenient for folks to be able to do the process that's outlined in this legislation, so they can keep those. The information is on file with the Illinois State Police pursuant to this statute. That'll be less of an enforcement mechanism and more of a compliance mechanism.
So less of an enforcement mechanism and more of a compliance mechanism, meaning that they're just going to be looking for people to comply with this, not necessarily going out and enforcing it. At least that was the sentiments from the Illinois State Police back in December before the law ultimately passed. Now, here we are just about 2 weeks or so before the October 1st opening of the window for registration, filing an affidavit, or if you don't do that by January 1st, you face criminal penalties, a Class A misdemeanor for the first offense and up to a Class 3 felony for second and subsequent offenses. We'll find out all of the rules in short order. They got until October 1st to publish those rules on an emergency basis, and then those go in front of the Joint Committee Administration on Rules, the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules, JCAR. So these things are going to be coming together here in the next couple of weeks, and we will be one of the only outlets out there that will be covering this in detail. So guarantee that, all right? So stay tuned. A ton more coming up on this issue, not just here in Illinois, but elsewhere throughout the country.